The wind howled across the frozen wasteland of glaciers, severing, carrying crystals of ice that glittered like diamonds under the pale blue sun. Stein adjusted his thermal suit and squinted through the blizzard, his scanner beeping frantically in his gloved hand. He had been tracking the distress signal for 3 days now. Ever since his cargo ship picked up the faint transmission from this desolate ice planet, he had expected to find wreckage, perhaps survivors from a crashed vessel. What he found instead made him stop in his tracks, through the swirling snow. He saw her a woman unlike any he had ever encountered. Her skin shimmered with an ethereal luminescence, pale blue with patterns that seemed to shift like northern lights beneath the surface. She wore garments that appeared to be woven from some kind of bioluminescent material, completely inadequate for the brutal cold that would have killed any human within minutes. Yet she seemed unbothered by the sub-zero temperatures. Beside her stood 2 small children, no more than 5 or 6 years old by Stein's estimation. They shared their mother's otherworldly appearance, their large eyes deep, violet, and impossibly expressive, watching him with a mixture of curiosity and fear. Fiza had seen the stranger approaching from a distance. Her kind possessed heightened senses, a necessity for survival on their home world of Meridia before it had been consumed by their dying star. She had wrapped her arms protectively around her children, Kale and Lyra, pulling them close. They had been stranded on this frozen world for nearly a week after their escape pod malfunctioned, and she had no way of knowing if this newcomer meant them harm. Stein raised his hands slowly, palms forward, in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "I'm not here to hurt you," he called out, his voice nearly lost in the wind. "I received a distress signal." Efsai tilted her head, studying him. His language was foreign to her, but there was something in his tone, in the gentle way he moved, that suggested he was not a threat. She had learned to read body language well during her years of fleeing from those who would exploit her people for their unique biological properties. "Come with me," Stein said, gesturing toward the ridge where his ship was docked. He pointed to himself, then to her and the children, and finally toward his ship. "It's warm there, say." Fiza understood the gesture, if not the words. She looked down at her children, who were beginning to show signs of energy depletion. While her species could withstand extreme temperatures far better than humans, they still needed proper nourishment and rest. The protein reserves in the damaged pod had run out 2 days ago, and she could feel Kale and Lyra growing weaker. She made a decision born of desperation and the small spark of trust she saw in the stranger's eyes. Slowly, she nodded. Relief flooded through Stein. He carefully approached, moving slowly so as not to startle them. Up close, he could see that Fiza's clothing was torn in places, and there were marks on her arms that looked like old wounds. The children clung to her, their luminescent skin dimmer than their mother's, a sign of distress. He would later learn. The journey back to his ship was treacherous. The blizzard intensified, and Stein found himself constantly checking to ensure Fiza and her children were still behind him. At one point, little Lyra stumbled, and before Stein could react, Fiza had scooped her up with a strength that belied her slender frame. When they finally reached the Meridian Runner, Stein's modified cargo vessel, he quickly ushered them inside. The airlock cycled, and warm air enveloped them. Fiza's skin began to glow more brightly, and the children's eyes widened as they took in their surroundings. Stein led them to the living quarters. A modest space, but comfortable. He gestured to the cushioned seats and then hurried to the ship's galley. He returned with nutrient bars and water, offering them hesitantly. "Food," he said simply. Miming eating, Fiza accepted the offering with a graceful nod. She broke the bars into pieces for her children, watching them carefully as they ate. She noticed that Stein kept a respectful distance, never crowding them, never making sudden movements. This man, this human, was being kind without expecting anything in return, a rarity in the universe she had come to know. As the hours passed, Stein managed to rig up his ship's computer to attempt translation. It was crude, piecing together fragments from various alien databases, but slowly they began to communicate. Fiza told him of Meridia, of the exodus that had scattered her people across the stars. She spoke of the raiders who hunted them, wanting to harvest their unique biochemistry. She had been fleeing with her children when their pod failed. "Where were you going?" Stein asked through the stuttering translator. "Sanctuary," Fiza replied, her voice like wind chimes in the ship's quiet cabin. "There is a station, numerous. Our people gather there." Stein nodded slowly. He knew of it, a neutral outpost in the Andromeda sector, 3 weeks' journey from their current location. It would require recalculating his route entirely, abandoning his cargo run, potentially costing him his contract. He looked at Fiza, at the hope beginning to kindle in her violet eyes, at the children who had fallen asleep, curled against their mother. He thought of his own mother, who had been a refugee from the Earth-Mars conflicts decades ago. Someone had helped her when she had nowhere else to turn. "I'll take you there," Stein said quietly. To New Meridia, Fizz's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, a universal expression of gratitude. "Why?" she asked. "Why help us?" Stein smiled, a genuine warmth in his expression. "Because it's the right thing to do. Because no one should be alone on an ice planet, or anywhere else. When someone can help." As the Meridian Runner's engines hummed to life, beginning their journey toward New Meridia, Stein set the coordinates and glanced back at his unexpected passengers. Fizza was watching the stars through the viewport, one hand resting gently on each sleeping child. Perhaps, Stein thought, this detour would cost him a contract. But some things were worth more than credits. Some things, like compassion, like giving others a second chance, those were the things that made the vast, cold universe a little warmer, a little more like home. And as the ship jumped to hyperspace, carrying them all toward an uncertain but hopeful future, Stein realized that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with 3 simple words: "Come with me."